The snow had started falling just before dusk, soft at first, then heavier, blanketing the city in a quiet that felt cruelly out of place. Christmas Eve in Manhattan always looked magical from the outside. Twinkling lights, glowing shop windows, couples laughing under shared umbrellas. But for Emma Carter, it felt like the loneliest night of her life. She stood across the street from the glass-fronted entrance of the Aurelius Lounge, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, watching her own reflection tremble in the window. Her black wool coat was thin, her fingers numb, her breath shallow. Inside her purse, pressed between her phone and a folded receipt, was the pregnancy test she had taken that morning. 2 unmistakable pink lines. 8 weeks. She swallowed hard and stepped inside. Warmth hit her immediately, heat, music, laughter, the smell of expensive food. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above white linen tables. People dressed in designer coats and tailored suits filled the room, their voices low and confident, the sound of people who never worried about money or tomorrow. Emma moved quickly toward the staff room, already late. Her hands shook as she tied her apron, her reflection in the mirror looking smaller than usual. Pale. Exhausted. Her eyes were red not just from the cold. She had worked here for nearly 3 years. Holidays. Late nights. Double shifts. Smiling through insults. Laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Accepting tips that sometimes felt more like humiliation than generosity. She told herself it was temporary. That she was saving for something better. And then there was him. She saw him before she wanted to. Alexander Hale sat at the corner table by the window, exactly where he always sat. Billionaire. Tech mogul. Media darling. Tall, immaculate, effortless. His dark coat hung perfectly on the back of his chair. His watch alone could have paid off Emma's student loans twice over. He didn't look at her at first. He was in the middle of a conversation with 2 investors, laughing easily, completely at home in a world Emma had only ever been allowed to serve from the edges. 6 months. That's how long she had been his secret. They had never gone out in public together. Never attended events. Never appeared in photos. He had been clear from the beginning. My reputation matters, he'd said once, gently, as if that made it kinder. This is just temporary. She had believed him. Because when they were alone, behind locked doors in his penthouse, he made her feel chosen. Special. See. He told her she was different. That she wasn't like the others. Emma picked up her notepad and approached the table. Good evening, she said quietly. Can I start you with drinks? One of the investors barely glanced at her. Whiskey. Me. And don't take all night. She nodded, writing it down. Alexander finally looked up. His eyes met hers for less than a second. No smile. No warmth. Just distance. The usual, he said as if she were a stranger. The words settled in her chest like ice. She turned to leave when the other investor chuckled. You know, Alex, the man said, leaning back in his chair, I don't know how you tolerate service like this. At my club, staff like her would have been replaced months ago. Emma froze. Alexander didn't hesitate. They're easily replaceable, he said calmly. That's the point. There's always someone else who needs the job more. The room didn't go silent. But Emma's world did. Replaceable. That word echoed in her head louder than the music, louder than the laughter around her. Her fingers clenched so tightly around the notepad it bent. 6 months of secrecy. 6 months of promises. 6 months of believing she mattered. And this was who she was to him. Help. Furniture. Replaceable. She didn't say a word. She walked away from the table, past the bar, past the kitchen, past the manager's office, straight into the locker room. Her breathing was steady now. Too steady. She removed her apron slowly. Folded it. Set it down. Her name tag followed. Her manager burst in moments later, red-faced. Emma, what are you doing? You can't just walk out. It's Christmas Eve. She looked at him, really looked at him, and realized she felt nothing. I'm done, she said. I quit. You're being emotional, he snapped. You'll regret this. Emma picked up her coat. No, she said softly. I won't. She walked out through the dining room, her steps calm, her head high. People glanced at her, curious. Alexander stood halfway from his chair, confusion flickering across his face. She didn't look back. Outside, snow fell harder now, thick and quiet. Christmas lights blurred as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. She walked without direction, her breath hitching, one hand pressing protectively to her stomach. Her phone buzzed. Alexander. She declined the call. Then turned the phone off completely. She had no plan. No savings worth mentioning. No idea how she would raise a child alone. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never beg to be valued again. The taxi pulled away, leaving the glowing restaurant behind. Somewhere church bells rang. A carol drifted through the cold air. Emma closed her eyes, tears slipping freely now. "It's just you and me," she whispered to the life growing inside her. "And I will never let them make us feel small." The bus station smelled like diesel fuel and old coffee, a sharp contrast to the polished marble floors Emma had walked across just 2 days earlier. It was still Christmas week, but there were no lights here, no music, no warmth beyond the faulty heater rattling near the ceiling. Emma sat on a plastic bench with her coat pulled tight around her body, her 2 suitcases at her feet, her backpack clutched in her lap like armor. Manhattan was already disappearing behind her. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Not her roommates, not her co-workers, and certainly not Alexander. She hadn't even known herself until the night she walked out of that restaurant and realized staying anywhere near him would slowly destroy her. She had sold what little she owned, her laptop, a necklace her mother had given her years ago, a few pieces of jewelry Alexander had once bought her and told her were nothing. The money was barely enough for a one-way ticket, but it didn't matter. She didn't want to return. The bus doors hissed shut and with a low rumble it began to move. Emma pressed her forehead to the cold glass and watched the city lights blur into streaks. Every mile felt like a quiet victory. Every mile took her further from the woman who had accepted being hidden. Her phone battery died somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania. She didn't try to charge it. She knew what waited on the other side. Missed calls, messages that came too late, apologies that only existed because something had been lost. She wasn't interested anymore. Portland greeted her with gray skies and steady rain. It was nothing like New York. No towering buildings. No crowds rushing past without seeing you. Just damp air, quiet streets, and a feeling of being very, very alone. Emma stepped off the bus with 2 suitcases, less than $300, and a baby growing inside her. The women's shelter was clean but crowded. The staff spoke kindly but efficiently, as if they had learned that too much softness could break them. Emma slept on a narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of other women breathing, crying softly, whispering prayers into the dark. For the first time since Christmas Eve, she let herself cry without holding back. Not because she missed Alexander, but because she was terrified. She spent her days walking the city, searching for work, her shoes soaking through in the rain. Restaurants wanted references. Cafes wanted availability she couldn't guarantee. Offices looked at her resume and politely declined. Her body was changing faster now. The nausea came in waves. The exhaustion felt bone deep. On the 4th day she found the apartment. It sat above a laundromat, the air heavy with detergent and steam. The hallway was narrow, the paint peeling. The rent was low, too low. The landlord, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, studied Emma for a long moment. "You're pregnant," she said gently. Emma nodded, bracing herself for rejection. Instead, the woman smiled softly. "You need somewhere safe." She offered half the first month's rent. Utilities included. Emma cried right there in the hallway, her shoulders shaking as the woman patted her arm and pretended not to notice. The apartment was tiny. A mattress on the floor. A hot plate. A small window that looked out over wet pavement. It was perfect. Finding work took another week. A small cafe finally hired her for morning shifts. The pay was barely enough, but the owner didn't ask questions. Didn't comment when Emma ran to the bathroom to throw up. Didn't glare when she needed to sit down. By February she had settled into survival. Wake before dawn. Or walk home slowly. Cook cheap meals. Read pregnancy books from the library. Save every dollar. Loneliness wrapped around her like fog. Nights were the worst. The silence pressed in, leaving room for fear to grow. Would she be able to do this alone? She placed both hands on her stomach one night as a soft flutter answered back. "You're not alone," she whispered, forcing herself to believe it. Back in New York, Alexander Hale was unraveling. At first he'd been angry. Furious even. How dare she walk out like that? How dare she embarrass him in front of his associates? But anger faded quickly. What replaced it was panic. Emma didn't answer his calls. Didn't return texts. Didn't show up at work. Her apartment was empty. Her roommates claimed ignorance. The restaurant manager shrugged. She had vanished. Alexander hired private investigators. He pulled favors. He made calls he'd never had to make for anyone before. Nothing. Weeks passed. Then months. Her absence hollowed out his carefully controlled life. His penthouse felt empty. His success felt meaningless. He replayed that night endlessly, the words he'd spoken so casually, the way she had gone still. Replaceable. He hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But the truth was uglier. He had believed it. Until she proved him wrong by disappearing completely. Then came the report. Late May. One word burned into the page. Pregnant. Alexander stared at it, his hands shaking for the first time in years. The dates aligned too perfectly. She had been pregnant when she left. With his child. And he had called her replaceable. By early spring, Emma's body no longer let her pretend everything was fine. Her belly rounded visibly now, pressing against the loose sweaters she rotated every week. The baby kicked most at night, tiny reminders that someone depended on her completely. Some evenings, Emma sat on the edge of her mattress, hands resting on her stomach, whispering promises into the quiet. I won't fail you, she said, even when she wasn't sure how that could be true. Money was always tight. There were days she skipped meals so she could afford prenatal vitamins. Days when she counted change twice before buying groceries. But she kept going. Because stopping wasn't an option. The cafe became her anchor. Morning regulars began to notice her. A woman slipped her a larger tip than usual. Another left behind a bag of baby clothes without explanation. Emma accepted kindness cautiously now, afraid of hoping too much. Then one rainy afternoon in March, everything changed. She slipped on the library steps. Her balance was off, her reflexes slow, and for a split second, panic surged as she felt herself falling forward. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Whoa, careful, a voice said. Emma looked up into warm brown eyes and a concerned smile. Olivia. They ended up sitting inside the cafe across the street, steam rising from 2 mugs. Olivia listened as Emma spoke, not all the details, not the past, but enough. New city. Pregnant. Alone. You don't have to be alone, Olivia said simply. And she meant it. From that day on, Olivia showed up. With groceries. With rides to doctor appointments. With stories that made Emma laugh when she forgot how. She never asked about the father. Never pushed. She just stayed. It felt unfamiliar. Terrifying. Healing. By May, Emma had saved enough for a used crib. She painted it white herself, brush strokes uneven, tears slipping down her cheeks as she imagined placing her daughter inside it. A daughter. The word felt unreal and sacred. Back in New York, Alexander Hale had become a man haunted by his own reflection. The investigators worked relentlessly now. Credit cards. Medical records. Bus manifests. Shelters. Nothing, until Portland. The cafe. She's pregnant, the investigator confirmed. Very pregnant. Alexander booked a flight within the hour. The neighborhood was nothing like his world. Narrow streets. Old buildings. Rain-streaked windows. His driver hesitated. You sure about this place, sir? Alexander didn't answer. He climbed the stairs alone, heart pounding harder than it ever had during a hostile takeover. When he knocked, the door opened slowly. Emma stood there. Her hair was pulled back messily. Her face fuller. Her belly unmistakable beneath the oversized shirt. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emma's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. What are you doing here? She asked quietly. Alexander swallowed. I've been looking for you. She tried to close the door. He stopped it with his hand. Please. No, she said firmly. You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up now. You're pregnant, he said, his voice breaking. That's none of your concern. Silence stretched between them, thick and painful. Finally, Emma looked at him with eyes he didn't recognize, stronger, colder. You called me replaceable, she said. Remember? The words landed like a verdict. Alexander had no defense. The hallway felt too small for both of them. Emma stood with one hand on the doorframe, the other still protectively resting over her stomach. Alexander's presence filled the narrow space, his tailored coat out of place against peeling paint and flickering lights. For the first time since she had known him, he looked uncertain. I didn't know, he said quietly. If I had known about the baby. She laughed. Not loudly. Not bitterly. Just once. Short and sharp. You knew exactly who I was, she said. You just didn't think it mattered. Alexander flinched. I made a mistake, he said. That night I was posturing. Trying to impress people who don't even matter. I never meant for you to hear that. But I did, Emma replied. And that's the point. She stepped back, allowing him to see the apartment. The mattress on the floor. The half-painted crib in the corner. The single chair by the window. Nothing about this place was luxurious. Everything about it was earned. This is my life now, she said. I built it without you. Alexander's gaze dropped to her stomach. His voice shook. "That's my child." "Yes," Emma said calmly. "And I carried her alone. Through sickness. Through fear. Through nights where I didn't know how I'd pay rent. While you slept in silk sheets." Guilt carved lines into his face. "I want to help," he said quickly. "I can fix this. Financially, legally, however you want." Emma met his eyes, steady and unyielding. "I don't want to be rescued," she said. "I want to be respected." He nodded, desperation creeping in. "Then let me earn it." She hesitated. Not because she believed him, but because she had learned that strength didn't mean shutting the door forever. "You don't get to control this," she said. "If you want to be involved, it happens on my terms." "I'll do anything," he said. She opened the door wider. "Then start by listening." What followed was not a reunion. It was a reckoning. Emma told him everything. The shelter. The hunger. The kindness of strangers. The nights she cried silently so no one would hear. She didn't soften it. She didn't protect him from the truth. Alexander listened. And for the first time in his life, he didn't interrupt. Weeks passed. He stayed in a nearby hotel. He didn't push. He showed up when invited. He attended appointments. He learned. And karma arrived swiftly. News broke of a scandal at his company. A leaked recording. His words, dismissive, arrogant, dehumanizing, about workers. The same language he had once used at that restaurant. Public backlash was immediate. Sponsors withdrew. The board demanded accountability. Alexander stepped down. The man who once believed people were replaceable learned how quickly power could vanish. Emma watched from a distance, unmoved. She was too busy preparing for a daughter who would never grow up thinking her worth depended on someone else's approval. The first contraction came just before sunrise. Emma woke with a sharp inhale, her body instinctively curling inward as pain rippled through her lower back. For a moment she lay still, counting her breaths, waiting to see if it would pass. It didn't. She reached for her phone with calm hands. There was no panic now. No fear. Only focus. Olivia arrived within minutes, hair still damp from the shower, keys already in hand. The hospital lights were bright and sterile, but Emma felt steady as they guided her into the delivery room. Each contraction was intense, overwhelming, but grounding. This was happening. Hours later, when the cry finally filled the room, Emma sobbed openly. Her daughter was placed on her chest, warm and perfect, tiny fingers curling instinctively against her skin. In that moment, every fear she had ever carried dissolved. "I've got you," she whispered. "Always." Alexander arrived quietly later that day. No cameras. No flowers meant to impress. Just him standing at the doorway, stripped of titles, power, and pride. He didn't step closer until Emma nodded. When he looked at his daughter, something broke open in him. Not the polished emotion he'd mastered in boardrooms, but something raw, unfiltered. "She's beautiful," he whispered. Emma nodded. "She knows her worth already." He swallowed hard. The months that followed changed them both, but not in the way anyone would expect. Alexander didn't reclaim his empire. He didn't win her back. Instead, he learned how to show up quietly, consistently, without conditions. He funded community programs, publicly apologized. Listen. Emma finished her degree online while rocking her daughter to sleep. She built a life rooted in dignity, not dependence. Her confidence grew, not because someone validated her, but because she no longer needed validation at all. One evening, months later, Emma stood by the window of her small apartment, her daughter asleep against her shoulder. Alexander stood nearby, respectful, grateful, changed. "You were never replaceable," he said softly. Emma smiled, not in forgiveness, not in bitterness, but in peace. "I know," she said.